Alright guys, we're recording. This is a live classroom for human biology on April 30th. We left off here at the pelvic girdle, and that's where we're going to pick up from. Oh, by the way, before we go any further, you know that next week we're supposed to start in Edgenuity. Well, they didn't have a human bio class in Edgenuity. At least they don't have one that's free. So all I did is I put a link to course sites in Edgenuity. You're welcome to log on to Edgenuity and click the link to get to course sites, or you can just keep getting to it the way you have been. Excuse me. So here we have the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle is made up of, here we have the pelvis. So it's made up of the pelvic girdle, sacrum, and coccyx. The pelvic girdle is here. Here's the sacrum, and you're not seeing that. Are you seeing my mouse? Lauren, I saw you were in. Would you unmute and tell me, can you see my mouse moving on this screen or not? All right.
Yeah, I see it.
Perfect, good. I like that much better. So we have the sacrum. At the very end of the sacrum is the coccyx, and the rest of this is the part of the pelvic girdle. So let's take a look at the individual bones a little closer. This part of the hip bone, you have the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Now the pubis has a pubic tubercle, you have an ischial spine, you have the sciatic notch. Guess what sits in the sciatic notch? The sciatic nerve. You have the ischial tuberosity, you have the greater sciatic notch. Oh, we already did that. And we have the iliac spine, and it has a superior and inferior. Now, notice there's an iliac spine on both the anterior and posterior of the ilium. And the iliac spine on both sides has a superior and inferior element to it. If we come over to the anterior side, you see the same thing. The iliac spine, we have the superior and the inferior. Those are the pointy hip bones. When somebody hits you with their hip bone and you're like, oh my gosh, that hurts. It's like bony. It's the anterior superior iliac spine. You have the iliac fossa. It's this plateau-like area in here, and then you have the crest. So the crest is the ridge going around, and then sitting in here is the fossa. You have the obturator foramen, and we've seen foramen already in different areas, and every time a foraмен's been a rather large opening for things to go through. You have the pubis and the pubic crest. Let's see if I can move that. The anterior part, the pubic tubercle, which we covered over here. And you have this round-like structure, which is the acetabulum. Now, the acetabulum is the bed in which the head of the femur sits. The head of a femur looks like a tennis ball, or maybe like 2/3 of a tennis ball, and it just fits straight into there. There we go. Now we're looking at the true and false pelvis. When you look at the pelvis as a whole, you see there's a ring right around here. Anything superior to that ring is the false pelvis, and inferior to it is the true pelvis. Differences between male and female pelvis. Well, you have a female pelvis on the top and a male pelvis on the bottom, and notice that the wings of the ilium are wider. Notice that the hips sit out just a little bit wider as well. The pelvic brim is also wider, and because that serves as part of the birth canal. The male pelvis is less flared, but it's more dense. Moving on to the lower limb. We're going to be looking closely at the femur, the tibia, which is the main leg bone, and the fibula, which is the lateral, skinny little bone that sits in there. And then we'll look at the ankle, the foot, which includes metatarsals and phalanges. Let's start with the femur. We have the head of the femur. This round tennis ball looking thing fits right into the acetabulum of the pelvis. You have the neck of the femur, and then the greater and lesser trochanters. When we covered the humerus, as we moved down the humerus, we found a deltoid tuberosity. Well, just like the humerus, the femur has a gluteal tuberosity. Now, in the humerus, the deltoid tuberosity is the attachment point of a very important muscle called the deltoid muscle, and the gluteal tuberosity is the attachment point of a very important muscle as well. We have the linea aspera, so there's like this ridge, this line sticking out in the femur, but it's in the posterior part of the femur. And that's the meaty part. You really can't palpate down through that unless you find somebody with really, really skinny legs, like bird legs. And even then, palpating that deep, that probably wouldn't be comfortable for the person. The head of the femur sits on the medial side. So the greater trochanter of the femur sits on the lateral side. And then as you go down, you have the lateral epicondyle and the medial epicondyle, the patellar surface on the anterior part, and the intercondylar fossa on the posterior part. That brings us to the tibia. The tibia is the larger of the two leg bones. It sits right in the middle. Now, the tibia has an anterior crest. This crest is very similar to what we just looked at in the femur. That is a crest-like structure, but for the femur, it sits on the posterior, whereas for the tibia, it sits on the anterior side. Because you do not have large bulking muscles on the anterior tibia, this anterior crest of the tibia is very readily palpable. In fact, when you walk by something and you hit your shin, it's the anterior crest of the tibia that you're bruising. And then you say really nice words. You have then the superior part of the tibia. This part articulates with the inferior part of the femur. The intercondylar eminence is part of what helps hold that tibia in place on the inferior aspect of the femur. You have condyles. We have a medial and a lateral, and this is where the condyles of the femur articulate. And then you come out here and let's do this one first, the tibial tuberosity. So right below the patella is a little bump on the tibia. And most of you will be able to feel that bump. Now, some of you are going to have a rather pronounced bump. And what happens is there's cartilaginous material as you're aging. This part is still cartilaginous. But as you grow, if you're kind of growing a little bit out of sync, where the bone's getting longer and the muscles aren't, and things just aren't necessarily completely working together, what happens is this tip or the end of where the cartilage is bound to the bone starts to pull off. So you have the tendon of the quadriceps attaching right here. And because the quadricep muscle is a very, very large muscle, very powerful muscle, it can exert enough force when it's attached here to the tibial tuberosity, and just above that, when this section is still cartilaginous, it can start to pull that away from the bone. And that's called Osgood slaughters, and it's rather common. So if you have a really pronounced tibial tuberosity, you probably had that going on while you were younger. It's usually followed by pain in the knee, right there in that general area. And you might remember growing pains. And you said, oh my goodness, my knee kind of hurts. And someone looked at you and said, it's just growing pains, deal with it. Well, it really was growing pains, but it was because you were pulling the part of the cartilage away from the bone there. And as a result, you have a rather large tibial tuberosity as that healed and ossified. Oh, down here on the inferior aspect of the tibia, we have a malleolus on both sides. So the one on the medial side is the medial malleolus, and you can palpate that. If you go down right above your ankle, there's this little sticky out that is, everybody has it. You can feel it on both sides. So the one on the medial side is the medial malleolus, and lateral side is the lateral one. That's also a real joy to run into something. Now the fibula. The fibula is the second of the two leg bones. Now remember, when we went through the arm, we had the humerus, which was one bone, but then we had the forearm, which was two bones, ulna and radius. Well, here we have the same thing. We have the femur, which is one bone, and then we have the leg, and it's two bones. So we have the thigh, or we have the femur in the thigh, and we have the tibia and fibula in the leg. For the fibula, the superior aspect is a head, and that articulates on the lateral aspect of the tibia. Then you have the fibula proper, and the fibula is what gives us the lateral malleolus. What's interesting about the fibula that you probably need to know is the fibula is non-weight bearing. All the weight goes through the articulation here with the talus and calcaneus. So all the force is driven through the tibia, through the calcaneus, and talus bones of the ankle. Now let's take a look at the foot. We'll start with the ankle. I like this x-ray because you can see the tibia, you can see a shadow of the fibula behind it, and here you have the talus bone, and back behind it, the calcaneus. And now we have the rest of the tarsals. So these bones from here to here are all tarsal bones. When we were in the upper extremity, we went from the humerus to the ulna radius to the carpals. Well, here we went femur, tibia, fibula to tarsals. And then extending from the tarsals, we have the metatarsals, and once again, a set of phalanges. Notice one of the phalanges only has two segments, and all the rest of them have three. So we have a proximal, middle, and distal. The remainder of the talus bones. First we have a calcaneus. The remainder of the ankle bones. First we have a calcaneus, a talus, then all of these smaller bones go navicular, cuboid, lateral cuneiform, medial cuneiform, and intermediate cuneiform. The heel bone, that's the calcaneus. The talus is what the tibia sits on. And you can see the individual bones coming across here. These are tarsals. All of these are tarsals. And then metatarsals, and then phalanges. Lifespan changes, and this is something I've been telling you about the whole way through this lecture, is as you get older, you are not depositing as much calcium into your bones. At some point, osteoclasts outnumber osteoblasts. Remember in the beginning of our discussion, osteoblasts lay down inorganic salts forming bone, and eventually are replaced by osteoclasts, which actually dissolve bone. Both are present, and as you get older, the osteoblasts, there aren't as many, and they don't do as much work, so you really start dissolving your own bones. It's a spongy bone that goes first, and then the compact bone, and if it's postmenopausal females, that bone loss can be rapid, and that's why it's so very important that you lay down strong bones now. A hip fracture in an older woman, well, it can actually lead to death. Uh, with the hip fracture, they're immobilized for a very long time. It's very painful. And once they become immobilized, they're stuck in a hospital bed or at home in a bed. The lungs, because you're not moving as much and you're kind of stuck in this position, can get fluid buildup in them, which leads to pneumonia. And, it's a hip fracture is what caused the pneumonia or led to the pneumonia, and the pneumonia would be the cause of death. The second thing, the vertebrae also start to lose bone density, and you can get compression fractures, and those aren't pleasant either. So let's take one last look at how that all works. When blood calcium level's low, the parathyroid gland releases hormones, and that's going to stimulate osteoclasts to break down bone and to increase the calcium in the blood. When calcium levels are high, the thyroid gland gives us calcitonin, which stimulates osteoblasts to deposit calcium. But if you don't have as many osteoblasts and you're not as sensitive to calcitonin as you used to be, you're not returning calcium to the bone and you have a net loss. That concludes the lecture piece for the skeletal system. I'm going to stop the recording and see if there are any questions then.